Welcome everyone to the development sessions. I'm Stephanie Russell and I'm Georgia Municipal Association's Economic Development Manager. We're so glad that you guys are all attending today. We have a fantastic presentation today on transportation. We're very excited about having some really great speakers from our state to talk to you about using transportation projects for economic development. Before I get started, I just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping. If you should have any questions during today's presentation, please feel free to put them in the Q&A or the chat. Chris Higdon, my colleague, will be monitoring that for us. And with that, I'd like to get started and introduce our facilitator, Mayor Matt Sill from the City of Occilla.
Hey, thanks, Stephanie, and welcome everybody. As she said, we've got a great set of panelists to go through. I'm here not because I've had any expertise in transportation, so I'm looking forward to the presentations and the discussion as well. As Stephanie said, if you have any questions about the presentations or for some of the presenters, you don't have to wait until the Q&A session at the end. You can go ahead, and there's actually two possibilities here. There's the Q&A box that Chris Higdon is monitoring. You can go ahead and put it in there as the presentations are going, even though we'll get to it at the end once all three of them are done. Or there's also the chat box, we're monitoring that as well. So either one, if you have a preference, you can put them there. And if you've got a question that's specific to a specific presentation, if you would go ahead and put the person's name you'd like me to ask the question of, that would be helpful when we get to the Q&A if there's several questions. So I'm going to make introductions of our panelists and then let them do some presentations, and we'll get to that later, the Q&A section. We've got three. One of them's having a little bit of technical difficulty, so we know that she'll be on by the time it's time for her to go. And that is SueAnne Decker. She has a PE, and it's two of our guests that have a PE, and that stands for Professional Engineer, which is something it takes a lot of study and a very difficult test to pass to get that designation. So just want to make sure everyone knew that wasn't just someone deciding to call themselves a professional. And as Chris Higdon joked, it doesn't stand for physical education either. So if you took PE in middle school, that doesn't make you the same thing as these folks. But SueAnne Decker is a PE. She's the District Pre-Construction Engineer with the Georgia Department of Transportation. We'll be hearing from her a little bit later. Also with us, we have Andrew Parker, who also has a PE, and he is the Public Works Director in the City of Dalton. And also joining us is Jennifer Scott, who is the Town Manager of the City of Brazleton. She said she's the Town Manager. I said, we don't have towns. She corrected me. It is in her charter that way, so Brazleton is a town. And while she is not a PE, I learned before the presentation started, she has her JD. So she is qualified in a completely different area for us today. So I'm gonna let them talk a little bit more about themselves and what they're doing and projects they've been working on. And we'll start with Andrew and his presentation. So Andrew, take it away. Andrew, you're on mute.
Thank you, Mayor Matt.
Yes, sir.
All right, I'm going to share my screen here. Bear with me. Mayor Matt, can you confirm that you guys see my screen okay?
You're coming through good.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that introduction. As Mayor Matt said, I'm Andrew Parker. I'm the Public Works Director for the City of Dalton. I've been in this role since 2019, but I've been with the City of Dalton for 11 years and in prior roles as Assistant Public Works Director, as well as a project engineer. Just a little bit about Dalton, if you're not already familiar. We're located in Northwest Georgia, right along the Tennessee border, and the city sits right along Interstate 75, about 30 miles south of Chattanooga, 90 miles north of the city of Atlanta. And we have a population of 33,000. Of course, that's not been updated in the most recent census, so we expect to be a little bit above that. But we're affectionately known as the carpet and floor covering capital of the world because of our large textile manufacturing base. The reason I mention that as it relates to transportation is because we have a lot of jobs here, and so that population actually doubles during the daytime. So from a transportation perspective, that brings some unique challenges that we work through as traffic engineers and public works staff to manage that heavy load on our infrastructure system. As I said, we're situated right along I-75, and we have two exits that enter into the city, what we'll call gateway corridors. That's what I'm here to talk to you about today. is a plan that we've been working on from the beginning of last year, 2020. The first exit is at Walnut Avenue, which is a state route 52, exit 333. This interchange is characterized by being mostly developed. As you can see on the screen, there's really not any undeveloped properties. There's a lot of retail commercial development along just about a mile stretch of Walnut Avenue, starting at the west side, the left-hand side of the screen there at our convention center, all the way down to Tibbs Road. And as I said, there's very little vacant properties. Local folks would tell you that this is a congested corridor. There's several traffic signals, and that makes for interesting times during the morning and afternoon peak hours. What I'll say about this corridor is that it developed so organically through the 70s, 80s, and 90s and into today that there were a lot of challenges created because of a lack of a guiding development plan for this corridor. We've got, you know, all kinds of different design styles, private signage at varying heights. Just when you drive down the corridor, it doesn't feel like a consistent, uniform, thought out development. And so that's what we're looking to work on as part of our project. And then I will call your attention to Market Street, which runs due south from Walnut Avenue. It's a corridor that's really struggled with development. We've got an outlet center that was really big in the 90s that you sort of see there at that U shape that's really had some challenges with the onset of online shopping. So we're looking at repurposing that corridor to attract new development. The second interstate exit from I-75 into the city, one of the other gateway corridors, is Rocky Face Interchange, exit 336. And this interchange differs from Walnut Avenue because, as you can see, there is some development, but there's a lot more raw land that's open and available for development. And so as part of our efforts to develop this gateway corridor plan, we wanted to make sure that we have this.
Okay, yeah, I'm not going to see y'all down there.
Getting some audio if one of our.
Okay, so then, like.
Okay, thank you. So as I said, we want to make sure we have a plan in place here so that as future development occurs and we're not having the challenges that I spoke about on Walnut Avenue. So our goals and sort of concept for this project that we started at the beginning of 2020 really had four main strategic goals. And that is, number one, create a guiding plan for the gateway corridors. And that gets into things that involve, you know, creating signage ordinance to bring uniformity through the corridor, dealing with access management. There's quite a bit of driveways on this Walnut Avenue corridor, and I'll show you that in just a second. We wanted to improve corridor aesthetics. There's been a lot of development prior to our vegetation ordinance being adopted and stormwater management ordinances being adopted, and so there's just a lot of concrete and asphalt that we want to try to dress up so that it is a nice, beautiful gateway into the city as you get off of either of these two exits. Finally, you know, we want to also address congestion. You know, as I mentioned, locally, everybody knows as a result of our daytime population doubling, we've got congestion issues. We want to work, we've looked at several different concepts and how to deal with that, including backage roads, interparcel connectivity. I'm going to show you several drawings that show you our strategy about how we're dealing with that. And when we think of connectivity, we can't overlook pedestrian connectivity, walkability. That's a big thing with development and attracting young professionals, is having these opportunities for them to walk to their place of interest rather than just jump in a vehicle and drive. Both of these corridors are situated near residential areas, and so we want to create more accessibility to the points of interest, and we'll show you how we're doing that. And then finally, as it relates to today's session, is we want to use this as an opportunity to spur economic development. And then on the Walnut Avenue corridor, we want to have reinvestment in existing sites. So I'm just going to move through this quickly, and then we can take time at the end to ask questions, and or I can follow up with additional information. One of the neatest parts of this plan was that we formed a stakeholder group very early that was made up of landowners on these corridors, business owners, our local hospital, local elected officials, residents, DOT, because as I mentioned, both of these corridors are state routes and involving the interchanges. And one of the earlier parts of that process was, let's develop some design themes to work around, because we know we want our transportation projects that we pursue to have these landscaping elements to beautify the corridors. And so, as I mentioned, Dalton's history is carpet, and we had, you know, the spur of the carpet manufacturing center here in Dalton was the chenille bedspreads, the peacock bedspreads, which you see on the screen. And so the stakeholder group thought, what better way to pay homage to Dalton's roots, but also to have some really interesting design themes to work from than to use like red carpet, for example, or the chenille peacock bedspreads to use as design themes. And so we use some polling, you know, with our stakeholder group to say, what did you like best between the themes and different potential design elements? 71% of our stakeholder group said they liked both and they wanted us to use both in their design. And then we had them look at different ways of beautifying our bridges, signage. And so you see an example, if you drive down the interstate, and especially a lot of metro Atlanta cities, you're starting to see more structural elements add to the bridges, overpasses to provide an architectural element. We looked at things like landscaping, signage, to get buy-in from the stakeholder group and let them help us in the early parts of the design phase to understand what our project was going to look like. So here's just a quick conceptual rendering of what the Rocky Face interchange, our designers, we brought on a consultant named GMC, Goodwin Mills Kaywood, to help us put a plan together. They had a multifaceted team of architects, engineers, artists to be able to help us realize this vision that we've created through several stakeholder discussions. And as you see here, the beautiful peacock sort of undulating shrubs that roll out, and some of those are paying homage to red carpet. In the bottom left, you see a peacock structure, fantail type structure that potentially could be added at the off-ramp, so that when you're entering Dalton, if you're not, we get a lot of interstate traffic from, you know, Florida up into the Northeast. And so the first thing I think when you see this is your curiosity is piqued and you want to understand more about the city, and you're going to, you know, get on your phone and take a look. Why is there a peacock feather when I get off here in Dalton? Also, you see Walnut Avenue, same thing, beautiful landscaping. These were the conceptual renderings that we used for the basis of our plan. Finally, here's another rendering that shows what you know, a physical structure might look like added to the bridge, illuminated by LEDs. And again, all of this we're having to work with GDOT and FHWA because it's the interstate and what we can and can't do. But it set the vision and the tone for the project to come. Our participants really love the Main Street concept, and this has a lot to do with transportation. You know, back in the 80s and 90s, malls and brick and mortar was really big, and it was how much parking can you get? You know, folks wanted this large amount of parking, little landscaping, very little stormwater, green infrastructure strategies, and now folks are wanting to move back to have smaller parking areas, more infill development, more interparcel connectivity. And as you see, 90% of our group preferred that design. So this overlay that you see on the screen is exactly what, you know, our vision is for Walnut Avenue. You see, in contrast with the aerial image I showed you earlier, you see a lot more landscaping, a lot more interparcel connectivity, which we feel like will make a significant improvement on congestion. You also see redevelopment of the Market Street corridor and the outlet center to create some out parcels for development, as well as some of the undeveloped property to the south. We feel like can really serve as a good location for high-end residential condominiums, townhomes, things of that nature. This is just a connectivity plan that you see on that corridor to take some of that congestion and traffic demand off of Walnut Avenue by creating backage roads, interparcel connectivity. Those are things we're working through right now as part of our plan. This shows what our group preferred in terms of how Walnut Avenue, the state route, could eventually look. It's, again, very basic today, curb and gutter, a divided median, but very little landscaping. Sidewalks are there, but they're not very wide. And so all of these things to create this boulevard effect is what we're looking at in terms of welcoming folks to the city of Dalton. GMC provided several renderings of what, intersection treatments could look like and how this would help us in our goals by, adding street trees, removing overhead utilities, putting them underground, put this street edge to create a sense of place so that when you enter into the city, you understand that it's a neat place to be and a place that you want to come back to. This drawing shows our plan for Market Street. Right now, Market Street, as I said earlier, we've had a lot of difficulty attracting economic development on this corridor just because it looks more like an industrial road versus a destination, a point of interest that you would want to go to for retail, shopping, dining, things of that nature. As I mentioned, Walnut Avenue has about close to a 30,000 ADT and we're looking to address the congestion and traffic issues by consolidating driveway access. We've had traffic engineers look at the corridor, creating new consolidated points of interest. I find this really interesting because of my background, but on this slide, you see on that Walnut Avenue corridor, we have, including Market Street, 53 curb cuts for the various businesses along the corridor. And this is in about less than 3/4 of a mile of stretch. So there's a lot of stopping, starting, and that leads to congestion issues as well as traffic crashes. And so our plan is very aggressive, but we're looking at potentially, working with the stakeholders, the landowners, over a period of time. We understand it's not going to happen overnight, to reduce those curb cuts significantly to help provide some relief to traffic congestion. This was just a zoomed out view to show, obviously we can't do all of the streetscape, backage roads and everything all at once. So we've developed a phased approach. Right now, the city is working on phase 1 of this plan, which is to put streetscape improvements along Market Street and build this rear access road, new road connector that you see that would parallel Walnut Avenue to give local residential neighborhoods to the south the opportunity to get to Market Street or Walnut Avenue without actually having to drive along that corridor and further, cause traffic issues there. And as you see, the yellow interchanges, eventually we hope to pursue those landscaping improvements that I talked to you about, as well as along Walnut Avenue, the streetscape improvements. But as right now, we're focused on Market Street and the rear access corridor. We're working through design on those. This shows you a little bit further along plan for Market Street. You can see we're taking a lot of the existing wide lanes and converting that to 2 travel lanes and on-street parking. We're also going to be starting this first leg of the Dugout Road connector. And believe it or not, there's a breezeway in the outlet center, and we felt like to revitalize this underserved outlet center and some of these parcels that we just can't get folks interested in from a standpoint of economic development, we're actually going to run the road through the existing breezeway. There's about a 44-foot breezeway that you see there at the outlet center. I think our typical section for the road's like 43 feet. And again, the outlet center owners are supportive of this because they realize this is going to bring additional traffic flow through the center along Market Street. And then, as you see, I'll go to the next slide. I mentioned creating more interparcel connectivity. We're looking at doing things like a rear access street. And again, we're working with all of these business owners because some of this will involve them donating or dedicating right-of-way or easement to be able to construct these improvements. And the only way that you're going to be able to do that successfully is involving them on the front end and helping them understand the big picture about how that, this will improve traffic flow to and from their business and allow them to serve more customers. The three businesses that you see on the screen are all fast food. They're, to the left is a Panda Express, in the middle is a KFC, and then on the right-hand side is a Chick-fil-A. I think, from what I understand, this is one of the busiest Chick-fil-A's in the nation, and they they do a great job getting folks in and out, but they definitely need more means of ingress and egress. This is a rendering that shows that that parallel road I was talking about to the south of Walnut Avenue to provide some congestion relief, but also to create all this undeveloped property now can potentially be developed into high-end residential uses. Ultimately, the new road will tie into another residential corridor where we look to install a roundabout with similar landscaping as what you see on the screen. And we're mainly focused right now on Walnut Avenue, but we did, as part of our plan, as I said earlier, looked at the other interchange, and we really looked at the existing zoning because it was a little bit of a hodgepodge, a lot of different zone types in a small area. And to make sure that we're not going to create the same issues that we have on Walnut Avenue, we developed a land use update plan that you see. There's a lot of residential development on the north end of town. We've got a beautiful park that was recently opened on one of our drinking water reservoirs, Hag Mill Lake. But we've got all this raw land that's prime for development. And so to make sure that we're ahead of the curve, so to speak, we put this land use plan together to create opportunities for connectivity to the park and some of these parcels that can be developed, with the ultimate goal of having pedestrian trail connections from downtown Dalton to the Walnut Avenue corridor that you see on the screen, as well as to the north at Rocky Face. So we're really excited about moving this plan along. We're going to continue to coordinate with our utility partners, work through right-of-way and easement acquisition, move toward developing final design documents, and work through policy updates with our elected officials to make sure our ordinances are development friendly, but also provide some structure to provide uniformity as these corridors are developed. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mayor Matt or the next speaker.
All right, thanks, Andrew. I'll be on the lookout next time I'm coming through Dalton for the peacocks. That was pretty interesting. And I always know I've learned so much in my role as mayor of things that I just took for granted or didn't notice in construction and water and sewer utilities and transportation, but never thought about the number of curb cuts having such an effect. But it's, once you say that like that, it's pretty obvious. So thanks for that. And if anybody's got questions about that presentation for Andrew, go ahead and you can put those in the Q&A section or in the chat box. Either one will be fine. And we'll get to those questions at the end after all the presentations. We'll move on to Jennifer Scott from Brazleton. So Jennifer, take it away.
Good morning. I am Jennifer Scott. I'm manager for the town of Braselton. Brazleton is off I-85, about 45 miles north of Atlanta. We have 2 exits off I-85. We have 4 state highways, and we're lucky enough to be in 4 different counties. So that's some of the things that make us special. I thought Dalton's presentation was fascinating because he's at the beginning of looking at redevelopment, and I am going to tell you about the end of it. So in 2002, 2003, Brazleton's downtown, which happens to have the intersection of 2 state highways, Highway 53 and Highway 124, had absolutely nothing going on. Our buildings were empty. People didn't come here. In fact, they avoided our downtown. But in the meantime, the rest of town was thriving. And so we put together a focus group that included property owners and citizens, and of course our elected officials, both from the town and from the county, to come together and figure out why downtown was at a stalemate and what we could do to create redevelopment. At one time, Brazleton was the place where everyone came to shop from all 4 counties. It was a retail center, and we wanted to create that same economic hub again. So the first thing that was identified by the group was the fact that where our state highways intersected, it was an offset intersection. So while Highway 53 went straight through town, Highway 124 actually dead-ended into 53, and then you would have to jog and then get back on. And people said that they avoided downtown because that jog slowed them down. We had a lot of accidents that happened at that particular intersection. So that was one of the focuses of our team, was figuring out how to change that offset interchange. And then once we made that change in downtown, what else could we do? So one of the important things to know is that our downtown's on the National Register of Historic Places. I tell my council all the time, they love to challenge me. I've been here 24 years, but giving me my very first road project and having it be the relocation of a state highway in a National Register district, which also included a creek crossing, was probably a little bit much. But after that, I could handle any road project they threw at me. So we determined that once we moved that state highway, we could actually take the old roadbed and create an enormous town green and create a gathering space in downtown where people could come. We could have events. We could put in a small amphitheater. And then we also knew that by moving the road, the historic buildings which fronted those highways could be redeveloped and actually have businesses in them. The majority of our historic buildings that were commercial in downtown were empty at the time. So moving a state highway is not an easy project. It was a 9-year permitting, designing, and funding project. Brazleton has no property taxes. So we had to figure out a way to fund the project without a property tax. We ended up using that plan, the downtown plan, and creating a redevelopment plan and starting an urban redevelopment agency to look at funding that. GDOT worked with us every single step of the way. The then traffic engineer, who was Todd Long, actually came to Brazleton and walked the route that we were proposing to move that state highway on, walked it with us to make sure that he thought that it would work from an engineering standpoint. We got state aid money to help fund a portion of the rerouting of that state highway. And they worked with us through permitting, and I know they guided me a whole lot more than they would if I had one of those PEs. That would have probably made things a whole lot easier, but they still did. Because it was a 9-year project, we did a lot of prep work to get ready for it. We didn't have sidewalks in downtown. So we did a TE project, so partially again funded by GDOT, on Highway 53, and put in sidewalks, took out the ditches. We had rural sections. So you couldn't walk down the street without walking in a ditch. So we took that out. We put in storm drains and curb and gutter. We put in sidewalks and street trees, which always takes some coordination to put trees on the sides of a state highway. We did design plans on the park, or the town green is what we call it, that we plan to put in the old roadbed once we had the road project complete. And we also got TE funding for a portion of the town green. So when we were doing the purchasing of the right-of-way for the new state highway, the new Highway 124, we ended up purchasing land that included a lot of the historic buildings. The owner of those properties didn't believe that the historic buildings were worth saving, and the town did believe that they were. We think that our history is one of the things that makes us unique, and so we purchased those buildings as part of the right-of-way acquisition. We had one that had to be moved, and we actually did lose 2 buildings that we could not rehabilitate. They had deteriorated to the point where even I could not figure out a way to save them. But all the other buildings, we started rehabilitation while the road project was starting. And it was amazing how fast, once we fixed the buildings to a point where they were habitable, that new businesses moved in. It's been very exciting to see it. So we finished our road project. We opened our town green in 2016. It was actually where we held our town centennial celebration, because that was when we turned 100 years old. And we used the town green for that celebration. And it's amazing. Our downtown now is, again, the gathering place. We do not have any vacancies in downtown. We've become a business incubator. Some of our historic buildings are very small, and we've had businesses that have opened in them and done so well that they've actually been able to move out and into larger spaces in downtown. We've done expansions on some of the historic buildings because we don't have any empty buildings. And I don't mean just the town's buildings. There are no vacancies in any building downtown. So all of our private property owners also had great benefits from that. Because we don't have the taxes, we also got Jackson County, our downtown's in Jackson County, to do a TAD for the downtown to help pay for some of the improvements like the town green. And so that's also been a benefit to the county. When our TAD period ends, they're going to see a much larger tax base here than they did before we did all of the projects. And we've continued our redevelopment plan. Our businesses were doing so well that we actually had a parking problem in Brazleton. And if you had told me in 2003 that there would be a problem finding parking in Brazleton, I would have laughed, because nobody came here. But we ended up building a parking deck to accommodate all the people coming for events and to shop here and to eat here, because our restaurants are doing very, very well. And then we're building a civic center right now next to the parking deck to host some larger events. The events on our town green have been very popular, both the ones that we hold, but also it is used by all kinds of other entities to hold events. We even had one of our local high schools held their prom on the town green just a few months ago. But of course, everything on a town green is weather dependent, right? So the Civic Center will give us a location in downtown where we don't have to worry about the weather. And we continue our partnership with GDOT. So if you're not familiar, there's a grant program called TAP, and we applied for and received a TAP grant to design sidewalks to connect some of our subdivisions and other residential developments that are just outside downtown with downtown. All of those areas were still rural sections, so we couldn't just go put in a sidewalk. So we're designing stormwater, and we're going to put in sidewalks, and of course put in lighting for safety. And as I said, that's another GDOT partnership where they not only work with me on the design, but also help fund. So now that our downtown has thrived and we're connecting other areas to it, we've been working with GDOT on some other things. That's one of the reasons I thought Dalton's presentation was so fascinating, is we've also been looking at our interstate ramps and how to make them more welcoming for others to visit. We've been working with both Barrow and Jackson counties, because one of our exits is in Barrow and one is in Jackson, and looking at putting signage on the ramps to let people know, that they're in Brazleton, and landscaping those. On Highway 211, which is our exit in Barrow County, we have something called the Life Path, which is a 10-foot wide multimodal concrete path that our CID put in. And we're looking at doing a bridge that will actually connect over to 11 for that multimodal path. So it's a multimodal bridge, and we're working with GDOT on that location. But to be honest, I mean, even outside of town, SueAnne and I work together because she's in my GDOT district office, and they're looking at putting a roundabout right on the edge of Brazleton, where two corners are in Brazleton and two are out. But when they put in that roundabout, she's given me the opportunity to actually put in Brazleton specific traffic lights. And then I get a chance to brand that entrance into town. And that branding, I think, is extremely important as people come into town, that they know that there's consistent development standards. And our businesses say that when we do the street lights in front of their businesses and put our banners on there, that people take pride in shopping local and they're more likely to shop there. And so they do better. So that gives you a little bit of how we work with DOT here in Brazleton with 4 state highways. I could probably talk for an hour or two about all the things that we've done together, but we had a 20-year plan to redevelop downtown, most of which included partnerships with DOT, and we have 1 year to go, and we've done all of our projects. So I'm very proud, and I look forward to all your questions.
Jennifer, thanks so much for all of that. And as we kind of go into the Q&A section of our program, again, I'll just encourage folks to put in questions either in the chat or there's a Q&A box. I've actually got one, and this really is for both Jennifer and Andrew. Jennifer, I thought it was interesting. You pointed out, you kind of got a little bit of both ends of that timeline. Here's the beginnings of some things. Both of you mentioned, even if you didn't use the word collaboration, you talked about the stakeholders, the people you brought to the table. Obviously, that's a huge part of it. Also, I guess both of you kind of talked about a problem that became a problem before anybody realized it, and sometimes because of a little bit of lack of planning, that's not criticism. I'm dealing with a lot of that in the great city of Occilla. It's hard to see the future, and so until it gets here, everyone just says, well, we'll figure that out later. So the answer might be kind of about both those things, but in the process of doing these things and even moving forward, what are either what's a landmine or a pitfall that you came across that you should say, hey, other communities, if you're starting to look at things like this, look out for this, because it took us a while to push through this obstacle, and if we'd have done this differently, that would have cut down 12 months time or whatever. Or to be on the positive side, what is kind of a discovered resource, or whether that's an agency, a program that DOT has, something in your own community that you kind of discovered and said, hey, if you're trying to do some transportation or any kind of planning that involves transportation, if you find this early on, it'll help. So either kind of a con to look out for or a pro to be more aware of moving forward. What advice would you give to any communities kind of doing something along the lines of what you guys have talked about? And I'll just open that up to either of you.
Well, I'll try to answer first. And one of the things that I didn't mention, but it's probably important to understand, is that in 2002, when we started planning our redevelopment, our population was a little over 1,200, and today it's 14,000. So a lot of the people who were on that original steering committee were, there were a larger percentage of our population when we put it together than they are today. But I think the most important thing that we did, which I would recommend, is if you're going to be doing anything on a state highway, bring your representatives from Georgia DOT in at the very beginning. Don't make a lot of plans without having them be part of your team, because they can tell you what isn't going to work before you spend any money planning it. I do that now. I send them ideas I have. They probably think some are crazy ideas, but I send them ideas that we have now and say, go ahead and tell me if this is never going to happen. before I bring in a consultant and pay for it. So I am lucky enough that I have a PE on staff, a road engineer on staff, but she would be overwhelmed if she had to design all of the things that I want to do related to roads. So the other thing we did is we went ahead and put out a RFQ, a request for qualifications, and chose an engineering design firm very early. We already knew we were going to have the National Register District, which meant that not only did we want to preserve it, but we also, if you're using state money, you've got to go through the Corps of Engineers state historian. And back when we did our project, there was one for the entire state. It took him 2 years to review our plans. And that included me going down to Savannah to encourage him to hurry. So if you've got a National Register district that you're working in, start early with the state historian. That's my other advice.
Yeah, and from my perspective, Jennifer touched on a lot of the same issues. You know, both of our corridors, gateway corridors, are state routes, and so we did the right thing, I think, by engaging our district GDOT staff early, because as Jennifer said, some of the concepts that were put out there, they're like, yeah, we're not quite ready to see, you know, strobe lights, blue lights on a bridge or this or that, but you know, they gave us alternatives and helped our elected officials who sometimes, you know, may not have background with GDOT or any other regulatory agency, understand that there's a process, there's policy, there's different things that you have to work through to get to the end result. But I can't say enough, you know, about getting a stakeholder group involved early for collaboration. As I mentioned, a lot of our project hinges on donation of right-of-way and easement. And if you don't engage those stakeholders early in the process to help be at the table, help you make decisions about design parameters and have input, you're not going to have a very successful project, or you better, you know, be allocating a pretty large budget to be able to acquire the right-of-way that you need. And then the second thing I'll say is just, you know, after you develop a concept, trying to get a decent engineer's estimate early in the process so that you can plan for, you know, budget. We're using a combination of, you know, bonds and TAD. We've got a TAD district for the Market Street corridor. But, you know, you can't get the cart before the horse. You've got to create a funding plan. As I said, our corridor plan is really 5 phases. And the first phase alone is first 2 phases alone that we're working on right now is in the $8 to $10 million range, just because any infrastructure work is, you know, not cheap. There's all kind of different, as Jennifer said, environmental things that we're having to work through right now with a new location road, with wetlands and stream crossings and things of that nature. So put a plan together early for phasing. That helps set the expectation in the community. So that you know, your residents, your stakeholders, your business owners understand the timeline, but also with your elected officials to understand that we've got to take a segmented approach to making this a reality. And those are the things I think I've learned very early on in the process.
And SueAnne, let me ask you actually, and I bet you'll echo what Jennifer just said about getting DOT officials involved early on in the process, but what advice might you offer in addition to that as far as working with DOT? Because so many of these things are, whether, even if Occilla doesn't have any interstates running through it, not even in Irwin County, but we do have several state highways. So what advice might you give for a community trying to develop something that'll involve DOT?
Yeah, like Jennifer said, bringing us to the table early and often. It obviously certainly helps out. A lot of times what, even things that are not, that don't front our state highways, affect our state highways, for example. Let's say you guys are moving forward with purchasing a large tract of land and you're going to put schools on it. You know, you're growing, so you need schools. And it happens a lot. Jackson County is doing it right now, where they cluster 3, elementary, high, and middle school all together, one big tract of land. Obviously, that means peak hour traffic and let out traffic is going to be concentrated in one area. And what we can do is start to look ahead at what those traffic patterns are going to be and how they're going to change, what infrastructure improvements are needed, how we get those funded. The way I come to my local governments is I want as much money spent in District 1 as I can get. So I'm happy to help out with finding the different fund sources. A lot of us here at GDOT have been here a long time. I've been here 17 years. I've worked in different offices. I know where to go to ask for funding. I'm not scared to put together a proposal and ask. The worst thing I always say is, well, the worst thing they can say is no. But then you just keep trying. Brazleton is one of those areas that is very fast growing, Jackson County as well, and not just like Jennifer said with small businesses, but the amount of distribution we have up I-85 to Jackson, Banks County is exploding. And Georgia itself is becoming more truck friendly, and that can cause some significant heartaches for downtowns and things of that nature where our state routes, intersect. So we're working with our locals to come up with ideas to how we handle truck traffic as it increases through Georgia. We dredge the Port of Savannah, so that is allowing a lot more freight to move into the state. If you haven't seen it, it's coming, I promise. And so your DOT partners have that 50,000-foot state view and how it's going to affect us locally. And our traffic offices are all tasked with their performance metrics is operations and safety. So that's what traffic does. Mine is in pre-construction, so I'm looking at quality plans and quality projects and how we can support the traffic office and making roads more operationally efficient and safer. So I'm working with our planning office and I work with our traffic office. So having a good relationship with your state district and us having that local partnership is so vitally important. One thing I've seen since I've been in District 1, I started up here in 2016, is that as we've strengthened our local relationships, we've been able to do so much more together because, our commissioner always says that he helps those that help themselves. So when you've got locals who are putting together their own plans, who have their own visions, who are bringing money to the table to fix intersections, he's always looking for those partnership opportunities and where can both the local government and GDOT get the biggest bang for their buck. And so we work very well with the city of Braselton, and very, very happy to have Jennifer there and working with her. But we are still in conversations about ways of handling truck traffic in Braselton and what's the best way to do that and how do we partner together. And of course, like she said, when situations come up like the roundabout she talked about, it's going to be Highway 50 at New Cut is the one I believe she's speaking of. When those kind of things come up, you have that conversation like, hey, well, when we did this roundabout here, what kind of beautification do you want to put in? And GDOT's not going to pay for that, but let's have that conversation. If you're willing to pay for it, you want your lighting poles, you want your whatever in this project, you're willing to pay for that, then yeah, absolutely. Send me the specs, send me the pay items. We'll put the quantities in our plans. And when our contractor sends back his estimate, we'll just say, okay, Braselton, the items that you wanted are listed here. This is what they're charging us. Send us a check. And then we build it. And it's pretty cut and clean. And Braselton didn't have to do plans. And Braselton didn't have to get the contractor, doesn't have to deal with the contractor, as far as directly, as far as contracting. Yeah, you got to live through the construction of it. But, that way we can work together. Beautification of roadways enhances everyone's it enhances safety with the lighting. It enhances everyone's mood. It enhances driver experience. And if we can improve the way drivers are behind the wheel, we can make improvements on operations and safety of our roads. And I know that sounds silly, but it's very, very true. So sorry, that's kind of a long-winded answer, but yeah, get us involved
We wanted
early and often.
Actually, SueAnne, if you'll hang on a second, Chris Higdon, who usually sits in silence and is behind the scenes on these, actually has a question for you.
Well, it's kind of a
Okay.
behind the scenes question, Mayor, but we do have a question for SueAnne. If there are any programs for cities to do interstate exit improvements.
Interstate exit improvements, as far as beautification, can be challenging because at the interstate level, you introduce the federal government. And so not only do we have state stuff we have to go through, then we have federal requirements. So as long as we're able to meet those federal requirements, we're happy to do improvements. I know that some of you, especially if you've got an interstate, have probably seen Georgia going through and doing vegetation management, opening up a lot of those interchanges. I'll tell you what we've been able to do. Gainesville has done some landscaping and gateway signage on the interstate. We started working with a relatively young CID in South Forsyth. They don't quite have money yet, but what they asked us to do was, would it be a possibility for our wildflower program to go out and just plant wildflowers at interchanges? And we were looking into doing some things like that. So we have, you can go through our traffic office and get a permit to do it all yourself with, the landscaping or whatever signage. You can go through the wildflower program. We also have, I want to call it, I'm a Southern girl, was born in Alabama. I want to call it REBA, but it's not REBA. I think the end of it is a C, REBC. And this is our, it's a grant program Georgia DOT offers for gateways. And this is not in the, it's not on the interstate, but it can be along our state highways where we would give you a grant of up to think $50,000, I think is what it is. And in late 2020, we granted City of Sugar Hill, Cumming, City of Hull, City of Monroe, and City of Beaufort all got grants in District 1. And when those went out, I reached out to those local governments to see how I could assist them in getting through our process and getting their own, gateways into their jurisdictions. To find what I lovingly call the REBA grant, but REBC grant, you can go to Doing Business on the Georgia DOT website. It's under maintenance, or you can email me and I will send you a link to it and the requirements. So I'm happy to get that out. Like I said, I want pretty roads.
All right. Well, SueAnne, thanks for all that information. Andrew and Jennifer, thanks for giving us a kind of an overview of some exciting things that have already happened and will continue to happen in your communities. Looks like we're kind of wrapped up at the end of the hour, and so I'll Stephanie, am I turning it back over to you for closeout, or am I just saying have a good day?
I'm happy to close out. Once again, I want to thank our panelists as well. That was some incredible information, we record these sessions and we put them on our GeorgiaCitiesFoundation.org website for research and archiving purposes. So you can revisit them and share them for those who aren't able to attend. We are so excited to be wrapping this up. Thank you again, panelists, and we will see you all in the next development sessions.